And my computer says that it's 12 noon, which is indication that it's time for me to introduce myself, Steve Larson, a member of the editorial staff up here at Hoard's Dairyman. We welcome all of you with us today. Glad to have you along with our live presentation. Again, you can download the PowerPoints if you want to now, if you have a printer available so that you can follow along and take notes. And we want to thank Diamond V for their sponsorship of today's presentation. The title, Driving Dry Matter Intake on Dairy Farms. And our good friend, our colleague, and main presenter today, Dr. Mike Hutjens. Mike, you can take it away.
Well, very good, Steve. I think we've got our audio all solved here. We had a few challenges, and let's go ahead and move on with our webinar here today. It's a pleasure. And I want to add my thanks to Diamond V also for their extra promotion of the webinar as well. So we'll be off and running. And I think I've got to click on my screen, if I remember correctly, to move forward. What's our objectives today? Under the title, we're going to look at 4 different groups and a quick snapshot as far as that goes. In terms of looking at what can drive matter do for me. Under lactating cows, you can see such things as optimizing feed efficiency, dry cows, body condition score, metabolic disorders, growing heifers, growth patterns, economics, the cost of raising heifers and body condition score. And then a kind of interesting term, the nutrigenic genomics under the pre-weaning calf. So that's kind of our marching orders for the next 45 minutes. Things are really changing. This is a fun topic to talk about because our strategies with dry matter intake is also changing. So let's get ready and look to see what are some of these changes going to look like. Steve, we're going to open our first polling question, and we're under the gun here. It says, and only one answer is allowed. So this will be exciting. Which class of dairy cattle is most important to optimize or control dry matter intake? And you have the 5 choices there. So the polls are now open, and I'm kind of curious to see what people are thinking. Steve, do you want to vote?
Well, I'm looking for all of the above, but I don't see it there. So that makes it tougher. Most important. Yeah, well, I really do think lactating cows. That's what I'm going to say. But people are voting out there pretty good. We're up, that's 2/3 voted now. That's great.
Okay, let's close it.
I have to say, Mike, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to me. As Steve already points out, all of them are correct, and everybody got votes except for heifers over 12 months of age, and I think that's unfortunate because they should get a couple of straggling votes there as well. I think all of us think about lactating cows and milk production performance, but Steve, if I had a vote, I'd have picked the dry cow because I think there's some really challenging and new ideas and concepts that we're going to take a look at. So we're going to click on and move on. And a couple of definitions before we get going. Isn't this fascinating, this whole area of nutrition? The epigenomics or nutrigenomics. My simple definition is nutrients, when are fed to dairy cattle, may impact gene response by either turning genes on or turning genes off. And you're saying, what is that? And there are 2 kind of neat examples. We'll talk about only one of them today. The pre-weaned calf. If we get high levels of nutrients into that pre-weaned calf, she will produce more milk 2 years later. So we've impacted the animal 2 years before she produces milk. Another fun one is rumen-protected methionine. It can regulate fertility and immunity. So it has a role not only to produce milk protein, amino acids, but it has some other impacts as well. So certainly this whole area of nutrigenomics is really exciting. So some of our listeners may ask, well, why do we want to talk about dry matter? That's kind of a boring topic as far as that goes. And first of all, we know that's what delivers the nutrients. Remember, cows don't eat 16% crude protein. They need so many grams or kilograms of metabolizable protein. So dry matter really drives the nutrients the animals get. The other next bullet item says dry matter intake means that these cows are going to get, or animals, calves are going to get more organic dry matter. That ends up being more digestible nutrients, which then leads to more microbial yield, and as a result, we get more energy, nutrients, and amino acids. So it's a nice cascade that says dry matter really has huge impacts. Now, the negative side, we also know dry matter can have a problem with rumen fill. And of course, depending on rumen fill relates to rate of passage and what are the kinetics of that dry matter moving along, because it can impact feed intake, the rumen environment, such as SARA, subacute rumen acidosis, and of course, health, such as ketosis. And then the bottom one says, it's not all good news. You can either raise or lower feed costs, we can change feed efficiencies, plus or minus. So certainly a lot of important things circle around dry matter intake. I thought it might be useful just to give us some benchmarks that we can look at. High producing cows as percent of body weight, 4%. So that means if you've got, a 1,000-pound Jersey cow, she should be eating somewhere around 4% of that, around 40, 42 pounds of dry matter. Low producing cows drop down. The dry cow number is kind of an interesting number, about 2%. And we want to kind of control that of sorts because dry cows can eat more than 2%, as you'll see here in just 2 minutes. And here are my heifers. You're looking at the young calf, 3%. That can even be 3.5%. And then as they get older, they eat a smaller percent of their body weight, but they're bigger. So therefore, dry matter relates there. So kind of an interesting table to say, look at the power or the opportunities that we have here. So let's move on, Steve, to our first topic, and let's take a quick view. Everybody loved the lactating dry cow, or lactating dry cow. That's a good term. Lactating cow. And let's look at some numbers and some guidelines, some thoughts to think about. I love this PowerPoint. Jim did a nice job putting it together because we're really looking at the green curve. We're saying, look at this dry matter curve. And you can see a couple of things. First of all, it peaks out slightly behind milk production curve. And as a result, animals lose body weight. And that factor becomes important in terms of animal health, immunity, and of course, when it comes into such things as fertility as well. So what is the shape of this green curve? And you'll notice it tails off here in the dry period as well. And then you can see the body weight, let's keep it stable. Maybe sometime in the future we'll do a webinar on one of these curves, such as the milk production curve and the body weight curve as well. But the challenge is, how do you as managers synchronize these three curves to optimize performance on your farm? Here's a nice equation to look at, and that is for each 1 pound of dry matter, and you'll see kilos pop up. This works with kilograms for our European workers as well. 1 pound of dry matter will produce around 2 to 2.5 pounds of milk. Where does that number come from? And if you go to the NRC, this is the typical dry matter in a pound of the total ration, 0.78. And if you go to the requirement tables, 0.34 mcals for a pound of 3.5 fat-corrected milk or 3.5 milk and 3% true protein. So you can see the math is very simple. We're going to come back and visit this here in just a minute. So what drives dry matter intake? So this says how much milk I can get. You can see the formula here, very straightforward. Body weight becomes a factor, and then milk yield. And that is based on 4% fat-corrected milk. And again, you can use this, work this in terms of pounds or kilograms, and there is your formula for it. But there's no question, milk yield really drives the dry matter intake, while body weight becomes a secondary factor as well. Let's look at two numbers. What we have here in both PowerPoints are the same. Over here is the U.S. poundage, if you wish, and over here is the metric system. So it's the same table, but Jim did a nice job putting them side by side. So you can see as milk production goes up from 60 to 88 pounds, you can see the dry matter really climbs on these cows. But when you go this direction, it goes modestly slow. I'm going to pick this number right here. Here's a herd or a group of cows, if you wish, giving 88 pounds of 4% fat-corrected milk. If they're Holsteins at modest size, 53 pounds. Let's remember that number, 53 pounds of dry matter. This is NRC 1989. I like this table. This is my table. Jim also then worked out here looking at NRC 2001, the newer table, if you wish. You'll see here's that same 88-pound cow or herd, and now the number is 58. So that difference is about 5 pounds of dry matter. That's huge. That's a huge difference. Our experience has been our dairy farmers in Illinois have a hard time making this table work for them. In other words, that's a pretty high number to achieve. There's your formula on the bottom. And you'll notice Jim put there week 17, which means that we have no negative effects or reduction due to early lactation and building that curve. So we're kind of at that peak of that curve we saw back there a bit earlier. So that's your first question, those of you on the webinar, and that is, what numbers are you going to target? And what is your computer software program telling you? And you know, Steve, this is a nice time. We had a question that came in from a colleague in Illinois. And this came in and he said, when I reformulate a lactating ration, which strategy would you recommend? And this is kind of fun. First of all, and we could have made this actually a polling question, but we got to move on. His current TMR that the cows are eating is 52 pounds of dry matter per cow. Spartan 3, which is NRC 2001, said these cows should have 54 pounds of dry matter intake potential out there in the program. However, when he rebalanced the ration using the software program and model, he can meet all the requirements at 51 pounds of dry matter. So his question is a very good question. It kind of leads right into our presentation today. Which number am I going to do? So I would answer it two ways to our colleague MC here in Illinois. First of all, what's the cost comparison? What is the cost savings when you use 51 versus 52? If there's a cost savings, which there might be, my guess is he might save 8 or 9 cents going that strategy. Then the question is, well, if you put out 51 pounds, but your cow eats 52, now your cost actually went up. And so that becomes a factor as well. So I guess I would take and formulate and offer the 51-pound ration. But if they keep eating 52, then I'd stay at the 52-pound level and then adjust the nutrient concentration to reflect that as well. Now let's talk about cows right after calving. And again, this is some data that comes out of from Al Kurtz, published a number of years ago, but really good data. And again, we start looking at dry matter. So if you've got a fresh pen, bingo, this is a very powerful table for you. Now you can see here our first lactation, lighter weight cows and more mature cows here, a little higher weight here. A couple of take-home messages. First of all, these are nice guidelines. Now some of the listeners might ask, well, come on, Mike, I may put 4 dry cows in the group because they calved in and they're in the fresh group now. And the answer is, well, nowadays we have computer programs that very quickly will tell us weeks. And so you can actually achieve this number, really realizing this is a very dynamic pen as cows move in and move out. Now we take a look here and you can see on heifers, they start out lower than cows. That's your first take-home message. Heifers start out lower than cows. And then as they progress in 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th week, they go up at a slower rate than do older cows. This table screams at us as saying they are different. So therefore, if you have a large enough herd that you can split the fresh cows into fresh cow pen to young cows and old cows or first calf heifers, wow, I think you have some real opportunities and flexibilities in terms of meeting their requirement. Another concept I want to expose to us today, and that is on lactating cows, which I call marginal dry matter intake. Marginal dry matter intake simply is that last pound of dry matter that you get your cow to consume. Remember, going back to the earlier table, that should support at least 2 pounds more milk because I already made her maintenance requirement, any growth requirement, any heat stress problems we have. I paid all those bills. So this is, that last pound says it can go to milk as far as that goes. Then you come down and say, what's the economics of that? So if I have 1 pound of dry matter in Illinois, that's about 10 cents per cow for a pound of dry matter. That number might be a little lower depending where our alfalfa prices go this year and our corn prices go. Then we look at if we get 2 pounds of milk, that is worth 32 cents. I'm using $16 milk, Steve, and hopefully that number keeps going up a little bit more as fall approaches here. But the profit line says I put 10 cents in, and I end up getting 22 cents back. So that marginal dry matter intake becomes important. So all of us on the webinar are saying, what are the strategies to get that marginal dry matter into my high-producing cows, and especially in early lactation? And so that would be one of your questions. Here's another one. I think we got to really concern ourselves with lactating cows. And you can see we're adding water over there on the right. Here's a whole list. And actually, I borrowed this and then enhanced it from Dr. Randy Shaver at the University of Wisconsin. And while this is a very busy slide, let's highlight especially the blue things. First of all, you got to reduce long particle sizes to something that's less than 5 centimeters or 2 inches in length. In fact, there's some new research that says you should even go shorter than that because we don't want them to sort it on out. Adding water, as you see going on there right now, and or molasses can be a real plus in terms of keeping this TMR together, making it more sticky, and keeping the cows from sorting it. And then, of course, I like the last blue item on the bottom, and I can use the Penn State box. So if I shake out my TMR, and let's make it simple. I have a 10, 40, 50 at top, middle, and bottom box. If that deviates more than 5% when I pick up the waybacks or the refusals, then I'm saying the cows have sorted against one of those fractions. They didn't consume it, and that can be a problem as well. I get this question often, should I feed cows more frequently? And my answer is, ask your cow. So if I put another feeding, let's say I'm feeding once a day and I go to twice a day feeding, I recommend that group of cows eat more than 2 pounds of dry matter, which is about 1 kilo, then I'm going to stay with it because now I got more marginal dry matter intake that's going on. Steve, amazing thing I saw, and I saw it much earlier in Denmark, but also in Germany, the compact TMR. And there they are literally grinding the feeds much shorter, chopping corn at 4 millimeters, putting grass silage in and letting it in the mixer for a half an hour to beat it up, if you wish, and then add a lot of water, making it 33 to 38% water. And that's almost like a handful of, I call it cake, almost like a cake type consistency as far as that goes. So certainly this sorting thing is something we really want to control here in our high producing cows when we come to dry matter intake. Let's then do a quick look at the forage particle size. Here's a corn silage sample that has been broken out with a 3-box TMR, or corn silage broken out. And here you can see the corn silage. You can see it's kind of ratty. It's a bit long. I think this is going to be sorted out here. Here's your second box, and isn't that beautiful? A very consistent, and that's what the compact TMR does. It kind of makes it a much more consistent product. And there's your bottom box. I thought, Steve, we needed to certainly talk about the new Penn State guidelines. Most of us have heard that there's a new third box. Here's your third box. Now, the data I showed you a bit earlier was top, middle, and bottom. So if you got one of those older boxes, which I still like, by the way, you just add these numbers together as well. Now, the new one has a 4 millimeter third box, and that is now being used as anything above this now becomes functional fiber, where it used to be a 1.12, and that was a Dave Mertens guideline. And so I think we've really got some nice improvement going on here in terms of a much more useful screen out here. So we asked, what is functional fiber? Well, by definition, it'd be these 3 boxes. So you can see if this would be your TMR, about 80% of the particles would be functional as far as that goes. Notice we've really backed off on the top box. And the reason for that is your cows may sort against that. And so if they don't eat it, then I don't have the physically effective fiber I thought I was going to have. So a lot of us are saying the real magic box is right here. This is where we want to be in terms of having the functional fiber in the feeding program. So again, be aware now that there are now 3 boxes that you can order from NASCO. I just looked at them this morning. You can order this box, which is the 4-box system. Over here, you can see the 3-box system, which would be top, which would be the second one, and then everything in the third and fourth are added in together. And then, of course, some of us still have this box as well. So be really sure you know what you have so that we can monitor the right amount of physically effective fiber. I love this PowerPoint. It comes from the University of Wisconsin, and we talk about marginal dry matter intake and why, if I can't get it, why do your cows stop eating? And beautiful description. It says, they say there are 3 blocks. And as a dairy farmer, nutritionist, consultant, you must remove each or certainly minimize these 3 blocks. And the first one simply has to do with the feeding environment. A feeding perception, certainly an example that would be empty feed bunk. If the bunk is empty or has very unpalatable feed, the cow or cows aren't going to consume it. The feeding environment would be such things as heat stress, and some of us experienced a lot of that in the last month or so. Certainly lame cows would be another example of the feeding environment where the cow is lame or not wanting to lay down because of heat stress as well. So we got to control that. So this is kind of an environmental housing situation there in cow locomotion. Number 2 says something in the ration shuts the cow down. It simply says, cow, stop eating. And the best example of that was going to be fats. If you feed a high level of fat, Ohio State says when you get close to 7 to 8% total lipid in the ration, the cow stops eating that ration because it's been told to stop eating it. The neat work out of Michigan State talks about propionic acid produced in the rumen. And propionic acid may slow down, have an impact on cows eating less. Rumen pH. What about milk urea nitrogen? I'm not sure that's a one as well, but certainly all these things come into play here. And that's why you build rations and analyze feeds, is to make sure we get that job done. The third one is one that all of us can probably understand the easiest. You can see it, and that is what we call physical fill. In other words, the cow physically, is full of dry matter before we get the proper nutrients to her. And so we're going to have to come back, and we want to visit that one here in just a minute as well. Yet we got a nice question from a colleague in India, and goes right to the heart of this question. And the question is, dry matter intake does it affect feeding when you have bypass fat? Now, listeners, I think that's key. Bypass fat, which means those fats or those oils are not going to be ruminally active. So I think in the pre-fresh cow, I don't think it's going to have an impact. And if you're trying to get more energy or into that cow, then you could probably get away with that. Now, if it is not rumen inert or bypass fat, then that could affect the digestibility going on. So you got to be careful. So this becomes an important factor. Now, he also asks about fresh cows. And the fresh cow has two sources of blood lipids. First, she's mobilizing body fat, and then she's eating fats and oils in her diet. And there's some interesting work out of Ohio State and Wisconsin that suggests that cows and the fresh cows that are mobilizing a lot of weight, now their blood nephas are up, and that's a negative. And so you drop some inert fat in on top of that, that may slow that cow down. So I'd be cautious on how much additional fat I put in my fresh cow group, being aware. And you say, well, if I put fat in there, the cow will stop mobilizing fat. And for some reason, the biology of the cow doesn't work that way. She, instead of stop mobilizing or slowing down fat mobilization, she actually ends up eating less feed. So great question that ties in very nicely into our webinar here today. So let's take a look then at some of these factors that affect dry matter intake. Classic study data come from Dairyman Labs, 141,000 samples in last year's crop year. And if some of you were listening to Steve and I earlier, I think these curves are going to look a little different this year. But you can see this is NDF digestibility in 30 hours. And that's kind of the benchmark we hear. And so you can see that as we get into different forages, the line goes to the right. And that's where you want to be. As you go to the right, that means more digestibility, more organic matter. Remember that slide we had way back about 10 minutes ago? We're working there. So take a look. Here is BMR corn silage, and here is all corn silage added together. And that difference is 10 units. And so as you may ask, well, so what? It's only 10 units. Well, this is some neat work on Michigan State that says for every 1% increase in NDF digestibility, you can expect to see a slight increase in dry matter intake and an increase in milk production as well. So you can see there's 10 units there. It says there's potentially a pound of milk, potentially 5 pounds of milk that could come because of BMR corn silages versus conventional corn silage. Recently from Minnesota, they came out with a high corn silage-based diet, and they did a meta-analysis, and the numbers are slightly different, but they still go the same direction. It simply says that even in high corn silage-based diets, you are still going to be getting a response in dry matter intake and production. So, boy, you and I are going to be looking at NDF digestibility certainly in 2017. Now, the new kid on the block, and it's getting lots of neat press now, and that's UNDF. That's undigestible NDF, which is kind of the reciprocal of digestible. Now, the digestible NDF drives digestibility, nutrient availability. UNDF may determine rumen fill from forage sources. And then there should be a minimum and a maximum. And that's why some farmers in Illinois feed straw. What they're doing is they're trying to get a little bit more slow down to meet the minimum fiber requirements as well. In a recent article from Hoard's Dairyman in New York, we saw the guideline suggested 0.35 to 0.4% of the cow's body weight. Not a bad guideline. I think that will keep being refined as we get more research, but here's the bottom line, as I see it. For a Holstein cow, that's about 5 pounds of UNDF, and at that point she may be physically filled up. And we're using UNDF 30. Now, you're also going to see UNDF 240. It's a different number, so make sure you know which number you're working off of. For you Jersey enthusiasts, that number is going to be about 4 pounds. And why is that? Because the Jersey cow is smaller. What if I got first calf heifers? Bingo, same kind of concept. And that's why you love these heifer groups, because you may have to look at slightly different forage combinations to get optimal dry matter intake. Now, the thing I'm struggling with is I'm not quite sure where fuzzy cottonseed and soy hulls and beet pulp, citrus pulp, almond hulls, I'm not sure where they're all going to fit in. And so stay tuned, folks. But if I were a dairy farmer, I would have my lab test for UNDF and then calculate the pounds of UNDF my herd is getting. So when you get to 2017 corn silage, you might get different results and go from there. Now, the last thing, and then we're going to go on to our next topic, and I know we got to keep an eye on the clock here. Dairy feed efficiency, I think, is a tremendous tool, guys and gals. What that is pounds of 3.5 fat-corrected milk divided by the pounds of dry matter consumed. For our European people, that can be kilograms of 3.5 fat-corrected milk divided by kilograms of dry matter consumed. There is your formula on the bottom of the chart. If you want to go back, you've printed off, as Steve encouraged you to do. You got to print these off, though, before the webinar is over. Then you may want to, you'll have the formula. Here's a very simple example. 75 pounds of 3.5 fat-corrected milk, 50 pounds of dry matter, that's a 1.5. Now, what does that 1.5 mean? Well, in my guideline, that's a really nice target to shoot for. 1.5, one group TMR, you're doing a good job. You'll notice that high cows are higher, heifers are slightly lower because they're growing, low-producing cows are even lower, and that's why I got to get cows pregnant. I can't have too many of these dudes in the herd, or they just eat me out of house and home as far as that goes. And if the whole herd is below 1.3, you better have a friendly banker. So I like these guidelines. These are our Illinois guidelines, just to see where we're at. Norman St. Pierre, when he was at The Ohio State University, put this table together. I like it. It simply looks, here's milk yield in pounds and over here in kilograms. And you can see as we go down, remember, I'm talking a herd should be sitting around 1.5. And so I'm looking at herds that are going to be in that mid 70-pound milk production range here. But as we start seeing herds, a number of herds now approaching in excess of 90 pounds of milk, the feed efficiency goes up. And that's going to be important because there's dollar signs written on it. Here is an example of feed efficiency economics. If I get 70 pounds of milk and my dry matter is 10 cents a pound, if I get that same 70 pounds of milk from 54 pounds of dry matter, that's only a feed efficiency 1.3. Or if I get it from 1.5, that difference between 1.3 and 1.5 is 70 cents a cow a day. Huge. And most of us listeners here, you're going to be in this range right here. So there's dollars laying on the table as our milk prices continue to improve for us, hopefully a little bit more in this fall season as it's coming up. So the power in feed efficiency is to measure it over time on your farm, then ask, well, gee, why is my feed efficiency not as high as it should be? So as Jim puts in his handout here, or this diagram, we're going to cross out problems, and now we're going to try to find solutions. I thought you listeners would find this interesting. This is the U.S. record cow. In fact, I think, as Steve told me, that we're going to have the owner and nutritionists in 2018 actually giving a webinar on their herd. But you can see this is Tom Castell from Manitowoc, Wisconsin, over in northeast Wisconsin. And this cow made a mere 77,000 pounds of milk, 2,000 pounds of fat, and 2,000 pounds of protein. And that is the cow. She's a really pretty cow as far as that goes. Now, you might ask, what did my gold, that's the name of the cow, consume? And at a Mexican seminar, he reported these cows are getting high chop BMR corn silage, chopping the corn silage high, leaving the stalk in the field. That's a 41% starch corn silage. I'm not sure I'd call that forage. I'd call that a snaplage. Here gets their alfalfa hay, good quality alfalfa hay, but not knock your socks World Dairy Expo hay off. High moisture corn, sugar, a protein mix, and roasted soybeans. So what else did my gold also have? Well, she's in a tie stall barn, so she doesn't have to fight with anybody to get her feed, so we can just keep putting feed in front of her. And she is milked 3 times a day, and she was getting RBST when she made this record. Well, I'm not trying to steal the webinar, but this is kind of fascinating to me. This is one of the, maybe the highest producing herd in the United States, certainly I would think in Wisconsin. And you can see that they average 125 pounds of milk. They are calling 11 cents per pound of dry matter. That's really an important number. A little bit more expensive than my ration, but I could understand why. These cows are eating 63 pounds of dry matter. That's a feed efficiency 1.98. Unbelievably high feed efficiency. And when you listen to his presentation, he tends to hold back. It doesn't breed him quite as quickly as he wants to. Look at his heifers. His heifers peak at 132. His older cows peak at 166. Or second lactation and third lactation 170. So you can see he must have a crackerjack of a heifer program because they are really doing well. Same numbers over here in terms of kilograms. So, Steve, we're going to vote again. We're going to move on to our next topic. We're about 5 minutes late. Question is, the optimal dry, if I have the optimal dry matter intake in a dry cow ration, what can I expect to see? And again, Jim, only one answer is allowed, I believe. So again, we're going to make you work. Only one answer, and you've got choices. Increased milk yield and next lactation, optimized body condition score, reduce metabolic disorders, or improve longevity. So if I get the dry matter right, which one of those four will win?
Well, Mike, I'm going to go with the metabolic disorders, with increased milk yield being a close second.
Okay.
Let's see what others say. Well, the people are sure voting fast on this one.
And that surprises me because they're all right answers, Steve.
Are they?
I think they are.
It should be all of the above.
Well, we don't want to do that because that's a giveaway. That's way too easy. And I want to find out what people are thinking. So, Jim, what are they telling me? Well, Steve, you win. 52% said reduce metabolic disorders. I would argue, I thought body condition score would get a few more because that one is closely linked to that, at least in my estimation. Increased milk yield and next lactation, you bet, because you solved Steve's answer. If you solve metabolic disorders, then the next lactation works well and improve longevity. Hey, so we got a couple votes there because cows get out. If they have the problems with metabolic disorders and body condition, they will not stay in the herd as long. So let's go ahead and get ready to move on to our second one, and it goes much faster. So folks, stay calm, and that is dry cows. And I love this slide from Dr. Jim Drakely. I want to give him credit. He says, in the dry period, we want, and he kind of coined the term a Goldilocks diet for those of you that understand the three bears. In Europe, that didn't play very well. I tried to use that. And a lot of people don't understand the three bears, but we move on. Anyway, it says just the right amount of energy. And there's your answer. You want cows eating about 90 to 110% of their requirement on a consistent basis. Now, if some of you are looking at particle size over here, that would scare the daylights out of me because you can see they're going to sort that straw to beat the band here, and you can see here some haylage. Oh boy, scary. We move on. Dr. Drakely shared this data with me, and I think it's a take-home message that answers for more milk production. If you look at energy balance in the first 3 weeks after calving, you want to be over the green line. That means cows are in positive energy balance, which means that's going to affect animal health and fertility. And then you take a look at the dry matter intake in the first 3 weeks, and you can see you've got to get these cows, and these are in kilos, by the way. You got to get these in kilos per day. These cows got to really put away the groceries here in the first 3 weeks to get up here close to the green line. And some of you remember Paul Fricke's award-winning webinar. We saw that cows that didn't lose much body weight were much more fertile than cows that did lose body weight as far as that goes. What a powerful message from Dr. Drakely. So I thought we'll go through this quickly because actually you can go back, and Dr. Drakely did present this data a bit earlier here in one of the Hoard's webinar, and they're in the archives. Here is the diet. Pretty straightforward. This is the high straw or controlled energy. I like that term, controlled energy diet, because you could do this with grass hay. There's some Minnesota data says a lower quality grass hay. You can do that with it as well. Here's the high energy diet, and the reason it's high energy, as you can see, has a lot more corn in it, and these cows will eat 2.5% of the body weight. You watch and see that here in a minute. Take a look at the high straw diet. Notice it's got less alfalfa in it, and that's primarily because of probably decad, and we need the starch to complement the straw. Notice the protein. We've got soya, or could be canola. We've got soy plus, which is a rumen bypass protein, and then we got urea in there. So different kinds of nitrogen sources as well. And so here we see, look at these cows in the high energy diet. They're eating almost 2.5% of the body weight, achieving 160% of requirement. And you can see what's going to happen here. If you go to his webinar, you'll see these cows drop down here in intake, and then after calving, they're slower to come up as well. And there's some newer research that shows even a more dramatic effect here as well. So you want to be on the green line, which simply says about 2% of body weight consistently all the time, all the way up to calving as well. Some of you may wonder, what is this orange one down here? And what they did is they simply took and restricted this diet to the cows here and they were in box stalls, so and tie stalls, so they couldn't steal any other feed. So we could actually make this diet work if you limited it to 1% of the cow's body weight. That's a lot easier said than done on a commercial dairy farm. So this is what I call, for the dry cow, the 18 megacalorie rule. Dr. Drakely uses the 16, but the point is I'm going to try to produce 18 megs of energy, and if the energy density is 0.6 mcals per pound of dry matter, she eats 30 pounds of dry matter. Bingo! We got it. Now we got it. We met her energy requirements. She is physically full. After calving, she's going to eat more, and her rumen is really functioning, and she's really cud chewing. But remember, these cows better eat 30 pounds of dry matter if they're a mature cow. Heifer is 25 pounds, because if you don't, now I got them energy deficient, and they're going to lose body weight, and you're going to have some challenges. If you're going to use straw or low-quality hays in the diet, here are all the guidelines from Dr. Drakely. I highlighted what I think are 3 very important ones. First of all, you have to have 1,100 to 1,200 grams of metabolizable protein. It's got to be done with a rumen model. Otherwise, we're going to be short on amino acids. No sorting. No sorting, so most people are pre-processing the straw, and this would be the Penn State box, 30% top, 30 in the middle, 33 in the bottom. Right? One third, nothing longer. I would argue an inch. Now, most people say 2 inches, but I would say an inch. Once you get to 2 inches, those jerseys can really sort it. And then take a look at mold. Now, there's some other neat things here as well you can take a look at. But the last thing I need in my close-up cow or my dry cow is moldy feed, because that affects the immune system, and already we have a challenge there. Here are some other guidelines that Dr. Drakely put together. So in sake of time, I'm not going to walk you through them. You can read those at your leisure. They're all there. Very well done. Here are the mineral profiles as well. I think this is important on the bottom. Notice that the rumenzin does have an impact in the rumen. And I think if you're in Europe, you have to use essential oils. So you want to manipulate the rumen microbes a bit here. Rumenzin does that. So if you're going to use these diets, you're going to have to use some type of an additive that's going to manipulate the rumen. Okay, we're moving on to our third part of the webinar, and that is the growing heifer. So that's the third phase of it. And I've got a question that came in, and we'll answer it to you here in just a few minutes. What is the lower dry matter consumption limit for pregnant and non-pregnant heifers? So it's going to come up. So that's the good news. We've got your answer for you, and stay tuned. And here it is. The thumb rule for dry matter intakes, you can see, and so here, these would be minimums. So I would say the smaller number, and these are as percent of body weight, that would be my minimums to answer our colleague that sent in the question a bit earlier. And so you can see that the pre-weaned calf can eat a percent of body weight quite a bit more. We saw that a bit earlier. Jim did a really nice job laying this visual out for us here. And so you can kind of see where those numbers are going to be in terms of dry matter intake. And the sad part, not many of my dairymen know that except for my commercial heifer growers. Trust me, they know those numbers pretty well. So what we have to do is make sure these animals are growing for us. Again, we did a nice job, or I should say Jim did a nice job. We've got the weights for the big breed heifers. I believe these are Penn State numbers, Jim. I'm looking at Jim, and he's shaking his head up and down. These are Penn State numbers. And so this simply says at 6, 12, 18, and 24 months of age, this would be the weight in pounds. Here would be the weight in kilograms. And over here, you've got jerseys. These are the wither heights. And these are the numbers. And for some of our registered breeders, you're going to jump this number up to 56 to 57, actually. And because you want taller heifers, we can argue that a bit later if you wish. So nice guidelines. So the ration must provide enough nutrients to achieve these benchmarks as well. The Cornell group have suggested that not everybody has the same size animals, and that's what this one does. So it simply says, what should your target change? Let's say you got some huge cows. That's a huge cow. I'm not sure that's the future cow. I think this is the future cow. But you can see this would be the target at breeding, which is 55% of the heifer's weight at breeding. So we're talking about 780, a magic 800-pound heifer over here. At calving, they should calve in. This Holstein should be around 1,250. Second calving, 1,300. And then by her third calving, she'll be up to that mature body weight there. So the New York people suggest that you may have different goals out there as well. And here again, we converted, Jim did all these numbers over to metric. So Jim has been very busy updating my PowerPoints. Here's some older data, but listen to it. Watch it very carefully. It says, if you're going to calve in Holsteins, and Jerseys probably be 22 months of age, 24 months of age for Holsteins, if you're going to have them big enough, and this is the answer right here, they got to grow 1.74 pounds per day, or roughly 800 grams if you're over here in the metric system. And this is the data that came from Cornell many years ago. It simply says if heifers are small, eventually when you get them up to the right size, these heifers are going to produce a roughly 2,000 pounds more milk than the heifers that are very, very light. Now, I realize this is a very small heifer. The slide also says that once you get them bigger than that, I don't gain much. I don't gain any milk. So why would you want to get them bigger than this out here in the program? So it simply says, what is your average daily gain that you're achieving on your farms? And this would be basically from birth. And that means you'll see accelerated calf programs coming to play here in just a few minutes. So here's some nice goals. Pretty much all encapsulated from the previous slide and the next one that's coming here. You can see there's our goals, and these are goals for average daily gain, wither height, body condition score, age at first calving, and body weights. And for a little bit of humor, Steve, that's after the animal has calved. So there is no calf inside of her. There is no fluids, or we jokingly call that heifer, that cow, decaffeinated. She's been decaffeinated, and Jim Baltz is not laughing. So we'll just move on. There's no humor here today. You're laughing. That's good. Thank you, Steve. I like to hear a nice verbal laugh. Okay. So what about this body condition score? Again, you can see as heifers get older, they're pretty lean machines in the first year of life. And as they get older, get ready to get bred, they'll start putting some weight on. And these are, again, you can see referenced in the bottom from Penn State University. You can see those numbers go up. This one, I cheated. That's my cap. I would like to have my heifers less than 3 1/4. No more than 3 1/4. So this is their number over here. But I like my heifers a bit lean and mean because they seem to have more metabolic problems that Steve voted for if we end up coming into that one as well. So again, that's where I would be on body condition score. And again, if you start getting heifers 3 in this area here, then you don't have the energy densities right. The protein, amino acids, the energy, or the dry matter intakes. Something's not right if these little buggers are starting to fatten up on us at this stage of the game. And I want to challenge us to make sure we all understand that heifer, the last 2 months when she's getting heavy with calf, remember, this heifer is still growing. And on many farms, because we aren't getting the right nutrients to this growing heifer when she's heavy with calf, then she stops growing. And therefore, they come in at underweight as well. So remember, I got to keep these heifers growing at a fairly constant pace here. Plus, we are developing their initial mammary gland for the first time and producing colostrum. And as these calves get closer to the fetus becomes closer, their nutrient requirements increase quite a bit. And in fact, about 60% of the nutrients are needed in the last 2 months. Oh, yes. And one more problem just to keep us awake. These animals eat less dry matter because they're smaller body weight. So it simply says these pregnant heifers, I argue, really need a different ration because they eat less and have much higher requirements than, say, their mature cow counterweights as well. So again, how many rations? So again, Jim has nicely took and twisted this chart around and said, I would argue on most farms, I need at least 5 rations. The calf starter, and notice here, I'm going to keep them out there for an extra month. I get nervous on a number of my farms that people are taking calves off a calf starter at 2 months of age, and they stall out because now they get the heifer ration or the milk cow ration, or they get something that's not designed to really grow and build immunity of these calves. Then I got heifers from 3 to 6 months of age as another ration, 6 to 12 months of age. Then I got my pregnant pen, my breeding pen here, and here comes my red box over here. That last 2 months, I'm going to have another ration for them higher in micronutrients, vitamin E, selenium, trace minerals, organic, trace minerals, extra protein, extra energy, because we want to make sure this animal keeps growing. This may be as powerful of a take-home message I can leave with you in this phase of the presentation. The last thing, and we'll move on quickly to our last one, and this is from Wisconsin from Pat Huffman. And one of the problems, Steve, we're seeing is that many farms that are raising heifers, that all the forages are too good for them. And here sits corn silage and alfalfa. It's a 50-50 blend, under 600-pound heifer. You can see at 600 pounds, they don't need any grain. You get down here, we got to dilute this down, and we call that a filler forage. And what's a filler forage? Straw. It could be corn stalks. It could be low-quality hay. In other words, something I want to bulk up this feed so that these animals don't overconsume and get heavy on me on the program. So again, depending on which forages you're feeding and the quality of that, you may have a window for heifers at basically breeding age to be in what I call, or Pat called, a filler forage out there in the program. Now, another way to control feed intake besides filler forage is just to limit that. And Judd Heinrich has done some pretty neat work here using high concentrate diets and limits their intake. Now, that means you got to have excellent bunk management. Heifers are going to have to be very grouped very nicely here. But there's some real advantages for doing that if you look at, depending where the price of corn is going to be here in 2017. Well, we got to wrap up here, Steve, because our time is just about gone. Let's finish up with the pre-weaned calf. And certainly the goals of the pre-weaned calf, pretty straightforward. We want to double the birth weight prior to weaning here. We want to develop the rumen here, and we want to build the immunity, and oh, by the way, do it as economical as possible. And so here is, I'm calling the accelerated calf program or the enhanced calf liquid program. This could be whole milk. This could be milk replacer. I'm going to cap the amount of milk solids at 2% of the calf's birth weight for a couple of reasons. First of all, you're going to see that I've got a 90-pound Holstein calf. I'm going to feed her about 1.8 pounds of powder, and that's going to be around 7 or 8 quarts of liquid. She may not achieve that in the first week after she is born, but that's where we're going to go. I'm going to cap it, though, at 2%. I'm not going to go free choice because I want to start to encourage starter intake. The calf starter will develop the rumen wall, the papillae, and the musculature of the rumen. Also, if I cap this here, and this is going to cost us probably about a pound for that dry matter, I'm going to reduce feed costs because milk and milk replacer is expensive. My calf starters could probably be in that 20-25 cents a pound range. And so being Dutch, I can kind of cheapen it down. Now, if you're going to use a milk replacer, it's got to be similar to or parallel to whole milk. And this would mean 26% protein, crude protein on the tag, 25, 26, and the fat 15% in thermal nutrients. Thermal nutrient temperature, Steve, we're there right now. We won't be in January, and then when it gets really cold, we got to bump the fat up to meet the energy requirements for that calf. And we get more milk. And let me show you this table put together by Dr. Jim Drakely. This is all the research published through 2015, and you can see here, this is the milk response. That's that epigenetic response that these heifers will produce in the first lactation, and we imprint on that calf in the first 4 to 6 weeks after it has been born, as far as that goes. So we're really excited about this. Everybody should be in one of these kinds of programs. Now, we have seen some new data coming from Penn State and the University of Minnesota that say you can achieve that also if you get an extra pound of calf starter into these calves over control. I think my challenge is, how do I encourage my calf to eat the calf starter? Where the liquid diet, pretty good chance they're going to consume that off the nipple, but the data is there to support that as well. And of course, you need a high quality calf starter, and you can read that at your leisure as well. So Steve, let's wrap this up. What's our take-home messages? Well, I think we looked at 4 different phases here, and we can see that dry matter intake is very important because it can be your friend or it can be your enemy. For example, fat heifers or fat dry cows, we didn't use that properly as far as that goes. Economics is always going to be important when we look at that dry matter intake on dairy farms. To me, a tremendous tool is body condition score and for milk cows feed efficiency. And remember, dry matter intake impacts growth, fertility, metabolic disorders, and longevity. So with that, I'm going to say thanks very much to you. Thanks for all of you tuning in here today. We are going to let Steve kind of wrap up the webinar, and we have a few questions we can ask.
Okay, Mike, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. I just can't imagine hardly anyone putting more useful and interesting information in 45 minutes. Well done. And our appreciation to Diamond V for their support of today's webinar, of course. We also always want to thank Jim Baltz, your sidekick down there at the University of Illinois, for all of his behind-the-scenes work. And I think his graphic work and other assistants have enabled our webinar series to be well recognized with awards by the American Society of Agricultural Editors. Also thanks to Patty Hutjens up here on our staff at Hoard's Dairyman. Those of you that are with us know that and have been with us before know that you'll be receiving a short survey here in a couple of days for your response to today's webinar. We appreciate your taking part in that, and thank you for your help in advance for that. And also flip back just a moment, if you will, Mike. Let's look ahead a bit here. September 11 rather. Bill Stone with Diamond V. We'll be talking about some feeding strategy with sponsorship from Kuhn. And also, Mike mentioned earlier, looking ahead to October, Mike Hutjens and Mike Rankin of the Hay and Forage Grower magazine up here will be working together on bringing us all up to date on the crop availability and quality as we look back on this year, crop year, and look forward to what we have to feed in the months ahead. And it's been a wild ride crop-wise, so that should be a particularly interesting and timely webinar. With those comments, again, thanks to you, Mike, and Diamond V. I noticed you had quite a number of questions out there, and we have some time left, so we'll let you go ahead and tackle what you have time for.
Well, very good, Steve. I'm going to certainly honor our people who sent us questions in. We want to answer that, and we always encourage you to do that. This comes from Kenya, and of course, they have a new president now, or a continued president there. And kind of a tough one, not maybe a lot of good answers. And there's a question, you can read it. The question is, what about dry areas? What can we do to get feed for dry areas for those animals? And to me, I think you're going to be looking at for us, my answer would be some of the sorghums and some of the Sudan grasses. These are much more drought tolerant, at least they are here in the United States. Some of those also have BMR characteristics, which again is not genomic. So again, most of these countries can go ahead and do that there. And of course, some of our companies now are trying to breed into drought resistance. So eyes wide open, I guess, for Samuel, that's would be my answers there. Then Bruce from Scotland asked about grazing. It's a neat question, and I'm not sure he's going to like my answer, but zero grazing looks to offer many benefits, and you can see that. No dry matter losses, palatability, fresh intake, but low dry matter intake and rumen restrictions or retentions, meaning high rates of passage. We end up seeing low butterfat tests. We end up seeing low fecal scores. Seems to let it down. Is there a role for fresh grass in a diet of a high-yielding dairy cow? And the answer, you betcha. Bruce, there certainly is. My answer to Bruce would be that I would like to have at least 30 to 40% of the dry matter that I control, which means I'm going to put a partial TMR in there, and I'm going to bring in some functional fiber. I'm going to bring some starch in there to try to get better utilization of the nitrogen, and therefore I'll build dry matter intake and better use of the nitrogen. So I just think I just need to have at least a third, if not 40%. And I argue, if you give me 50%, of the dry matter and the other 50% is lush grass, I will not give up any milk out there in the program. Then we got Susan from Missouri, and she has got a boatload. I think we've answered some of those questions. What's the best particle size for dry matter intake? I think you're going to be looking at the second and third box in the 4-box system Penn State. That's the particle size you want. Not very much on top and just enough on the bottom box. So we're looking, that's going to be somewhere in that 4 to 8 to 10 to 12 milliliter length. When you start getting over 20 millimeters, which is going to be an inch, look out, evil things can happen. Her comment is pretty straightforward. Hay gives me some functional fiber. I don't have to worry too much about that. When particles get too small, I think we've answered that. And when it gets under 4 millimeters, according to Penn State, then it is too short as far as that goes. Boy, this 2-inch stuff is bad news. I think even 1-inch stuff can be just borderline. So I really got some rethinking on that one as well. And haylage, and then the apple stimulation, that's got quality forage with good fermentation written all over it when you look at forages out there in the feeding program. With that, we're going to go back to our list here, and we're going to wrap these off fairly quickly, and they keep coming in as well. First question came in quite early. Should fresh cows consume 1.25% of the body weight as forage NDF? And I think the answer is going to be UNDF. And it's not going to be a percent of body weight, or indirectly it is, but I think it's going to be UNDF. And I think you're going to be looking at a number that is going to be perhaps, it's going to be, that's the number. Forage NDF scares me. If I had to give you a number, I would say 1%, because high-producing cows would be at 0.9% forage NDF. The fresh cows are going to be intermediate between that and the dry cow program. So you may want to look at what your UNDF and your dry cow program is, and then match that up with the fresh cow program as well. The reason I don't like forage NDF, and that is, how do you define it? And that says forage NDF from straw is equal to forage NDF from grass or from pasture, and I'll bet you a piece of pie it is not. Another question I can't answer, but it's a good one, and that is, it goes back to the herd in Wisconsin. And the good news, they'll be online here. I believe it's in early 2018, and they want to know, are they holding back on breeding these cows, or these cows don't want to become pregnant? I think they're holding them back. At least when that question came up, I think Tom is holding them back. But come and join us in 2018 and get the official answer. Another nice comment: how do you recommend to train feeders so they can follow all these nice recommendations? I think it's called SOPs. You got SOPs. And so we're going to simply say, when we're going to have mixing times, we're going to know when to put products in. I just think you have to do it. And now there is a firm in Wisconsin that are now providing training schools. Jim, I guess I should plug our online class, that we have online training schools for dairy farmers in the winter that looks at feeding cows and have many of these guidelines in it. So I think you're going to find training schools. Cornell, I know, has one, as does Minard Institute. So that's how we're going to train these people. And I understand some of these people will have this training will have to be in Spanish or something like that. Next question, another one that's very easy to answer. In Europe, we can't feed Rumensin. I understand that. I was in Germany and Denmark. What kind of essential oils are most similar to Rumensin in transition cow ration? I wish I knew that. I wish I knew that. I really don't know. That's an important question. And that's one I struggle with all the time with essential oils. That you realize, I was told 2 years ago there are 29 essential oils in Europe. And the question is, which one and how many grams of each? And the good news, every company says they got the best one. So I think that's a great question for you Europeans to look at for transition cows and for fresh cows, and which one are really going to carry the mail for you. Next question, it seems that a body condition score 3.25 is too low for heifers to achieve all the maintenance that they need. And I'm saying, no, I think you're wrong. What happens is that when the body condition is under 3.25, better dry matter intakes. And therefore I have more nutrients available for the cow. So any time that body condition score, be it dry cows or springing heifers or pregnant heifers, it just can bugger up dry matter intake and lead into problems. So I think we're okay there. What do you believe are the negative impacts to going above 2% of body weight in pre-weaned calves? I think the data is clear. Way back when this concept first came out, was free choice, all the milk they want. In fact, in Germany, what they do is they go free choice milk all the way for the first 3 weeks. Then they restrict them back at that point. The bottom line is that if you free choice milk, they will not eat calf starter, and therefore the rumen itself will have a different color, shape, and development. Penn State's got some beautiful visuals on their websites if you want to go look at that. So I think the negative is not getting the rumen development that we have to have at weaning time for that to occur as well. Next question. Boy, they just keep coming in, Jim. Shut them off. Controlled energy diets seem to work well for some producers, but others claim that you're leaving milk on the table by not feeding a more moderate energy diet. Do you think we can get more milk feeding a moderate energy prepartum diet and improve fresh pen performance? No, I don't think so. But then again, that's a Mike Hutjens answer. So if you're in Wisconsin, you might get a slightly different answer there. I think you've got to get the right amount of energy, 90 to 110%, as we said earlier. I think you just have to get it there, and I think we're going to be a lot better off there. Now, if you go to higher levels, then the question is, can you restrict the intake to the point that you don't get heavy, dry cows? Now, I was in a herd in Mexico several years ago in which they had 2 dry cow groups, the thin cows and those that were adequately in the right body condition score, and then they actually did feed a more moderately energy diet to those cows. What was moderate? 3 kilograms of shelled corn for 31 days or 40 days. And these cows really pick up their body weight as far as that goes. So again, that's a very biased answer, and some of you may not like that, but then again, I'm just challenging you to think outside the box a little bit. Another question, what if any role is pregnancy having on dry matter intake and subsequent production? Well, I think one of the problems pregnancy has is, especially in late pregnancy, is that it takes up room. So that's a bit of a problem there. I physically restricts the size of my rumen out there in the program. It also, pregnancy also sucks a lot of nutrients. When you start going to your models and look at 260, 270 days of milk, wow, you're going to find a tremendous amount of amino acids and energy being siphoned off by that calf. And then put 2 calves in there, and then evil things start happening. And Jim's looking at his watch, and we're down to our last question. And that was, would the use of a rumen-specific active yeast be a suitable alternative as a rumen modifier versus rumensin? And I would say no. I think rumensin and their essential oils actually select certain microbes. The yeast cultures and yeast products and the active live yeast actually stimulate the fiber-digesting bacteria, and that's good news. Don't get me wrong, that's great news. But what's happening here, that these other ones are actually favoring propionic acid-producing bacteria, plus they also modify the decreased methane production. Some yeast data will do that as well, but I think you got to be looking at something that's going to select the rumen microbes, and that's what essential oils and rumensin or ionophore does. It selects certain bacteria to thrive in the rumen. So we're kind of dictating what's going on in the rumen. So I think I would have a yeast product in my diet for my transition in my dry cows, but I also would have an essential oil and or rumensin, depending if you're in Canada or the U.S. or Germany or Denmark as far as that goes. So with that, we're right at quitting time here. So I think we will go back to Steve to wrap it up.
Okay, thank you, Mike. You did great on the speed round too. That's great. Lots of rapid fire information. Good. Again, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation, and to Diamond Bee for their sponsorship. September 10th, please be with us. Bill Stone, Diamond Bee consultant. Kuhn will be sponsoring feeding strategies, and then again, looking forward to October 9th when Mike Hutjens and Mike Rankin will be talking about the quality and quantity of feedstuffs that we're going to have to work with in the months ahead. And just another note, we are so pleased to report that our webinar series won first, second, and third place award in competition among webinars sponsored by the American Agricultural Editors Association. We especially thank the presenters that did such a great job. Also you, Jim Baltz, for your great work with the PowerPoints and making these presentations attractive. And again, thanks again to Mike and Diamond Bee for today. And we're signing off from Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin. And just a reminder that this webinar in a couple of days and All of our previous ones, of course, are going to be available. They're archived and available for your use and friends and colleagues anytime. Go to horge.com and click on the webinar icon, and it'll be all available to you. So that's it. Steve Larson from Hoard's Dairyman up here in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin, signing off. Thanking you and looking forward to having you with us again. And again, Mike and Jim, thank you much.